l'avoue. Et depuis, tu es ma plus belle histoire d'amour. Je t'aime.
Dear guests, welcome again. Now we are pleased to introduce an inspiring voice in the global education space, one who began her journey as a classroom teacher. Amanda Bickerstaff is a visionary educator and the co-founder and CEO of the AL Education Project. In her keynote, she will explore how the teacher-AL partnership is reshaping learning and how educators are redefining their impact in this new era. Please welcome Ms. Amanda Bickerstaff with her talk, The New Intelligence in Education, Teacher and AL Collaboration. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Sorry we're starting a little bit late. Of course, technical difficulties, but good thing I was a former teacher, so I'm very used to that. How's everybody feeling today? Are we good? Has it been a good day of learning? I hope so. So we're going to do, I started as a teacher in New York City, where I still live. This is my first time to Istanbul. It's been absolutely lovely, and I'm excited to be here with you all. And just so you know a little bit more about my journey, is I was a teacher, and then I started working in education technology. It took me to Australia. I don't know if anybody's been to Australia, where I was running an ed tech company there for 3 years. And then when I came back to the US, the first thing I did when I tried ChatGPT was I asked it to write me a rubric. I usually ask this question: who in here is a teacher or an educator, former educator? Do any of you like writing rubrics? The answer usually is no. I've been in rooms of 1,000 educators and like one person raises their hand. And I started with a rubric because I was really interested in something that was quite complex but very necessary to good assessment. And the first time I ever did that prompt, ChatGPT not only created a rubric and formatted it as a chart, but it was pretty good. And so at that moment, almost 2 years ago, I actually started AI for Education. And AI for Education is dedicated to AI literacy for 1 million educators. So you are a part of that million. Thank you for being a part of that million. We do work primarily in the US, but also across Canada, Europe, and now Turkey. So very excited to be here with you today. Because we've had technical difficulties, the title has changed a bit, but this is our traditional keynote where we talk a lot about what the opportunity is for educators around AI adoption. And so I want to start. The first thing is, you are actually not here for an AI talk. Because all of you, if you were born after 1955, are part of Generation AI. So 1955 is when artificial intelligence was first coined. And in fact, at that point, women were computers. So if you've ever seen the movie Hidden Figures, in the US, when we went to the moon the first time, women were doing hand calculations. And then what we had is a first computer that were the size of not this room, but pretty close. And at that time, from the very earliest days of machine computing, there has been a goal to actually create thinking and acting computers, those that can be like human. And so the first chatbot was actually in the 1960s, which surprises people. And it was named Eliza, and it only did one thing. If you said, I'm having a bad day, which I hope you're not, it would say, you're having a bad day, ? And that's all it did. And it was really interesting because even back then, that chatbot that even was very limited, people really enjoyed because they felt very seen by the bot. And so since the 60s, we've been trying to create these machines that can do what humans can do, but it's been a very kind of long journey. And so most of you have interacted with AI in many ways for the last 2 decades. So if you have, I see the cell phones out. Who's got a cell phone? Anybody who's got an iPhone? Who are my iPhone people? Anybody Android people? We love you both. You're both great. If you have an iPhone, if you have an Android, if you have a laptop, which I know you do, then you are interacting with artificial intelligence all the time without realizing it. If you use the Getter app to get groceries or Uber to get a cab, if you're using Google Maps or another map app, you're using AI. In fact, autocorrect on your phone is going to be AI. So everything that we have been using for a long time has been artificial intelligence. But if the ultimate goal of technologists is to create thinking machines like us, it wasn't fit for purpose. So all of why we're here today actually comes down to a subset of machine learning. So machine learning is where we were talking about, that's where you take a lot of beautiful structured data, so we're talking beautiful spreadsheets and rows, and then you're able to recommend or predict. So think about Shazam. You just got to listen to the Shazam founder. That was pretty cool, right? Shazam, very early on, used machine learning to be able to recognize the song and then also let you purchase it or find it. And so machine learning is going to be where the majority of our use of generative AI has been. But the subset of machine learning called deep learning is why we're here today. And deep learning, instead of having beautiful spreadsheets and rows and having computer programs that can do one of two things pretty well, what we have instead is the ability to take enormous amounts of unstructured data. So think every single Wikipedia page, every single YouTube video transcript and video, every Google image. And what's able to do now is these computer programs can actually take all of those pieces of data and create essentially a probability machine that lets you understand and lets outputs actually create them on the fly to give you the highest probability answer. So when I went to ChatGPT and I asked for a rubric, it gave me the highest probability answer. It was a nice rubric in a chart with 5 criteria and 5 levels. And so the way that deep learning is going to work, though, it really allows us as humans to have control over technology in a way that's never been possible before. And why you are here today is not about AI, but about generative AI. And generative AI, the whole infrastructure is less than a decade old. And what it allows us to do is that every single time you use ChatGPT or Claude or you use an application layer, you are going to be creating something new every time. It generates whether it's images, text, video, sound, or even code, software engineering. And so that's why we're here today. And when ChatGPT was released at the end of 2022, it was a radical transformation. And so I'm glad that we're here to talk today because we're living through an inflection point. And this inflection point is why we're here, but we haven't really felt the effects very much yet, but we're going to more and more. I will say that I think, based on our work, that education has been one of the most disruptive areas of all society. And I don't mean in the sense of lost jobs, which is what's happening in software engineering and what's happening in knowledge work, but in the sense of how we do education. All of a sudden, you have an easy button for every essay, for every worksheet, for every project plan. Even for, well, it's not as good yet, but presentations. And so what that does is it changes the way that we have to think about education the same way, and if not, significantly more quickly than we did when the graphing calculator came out. And I'll use that as an example, even though it is not really a one-to-one example, because the graphing calculator is very, very, very simple and did a subset of math very, very well. But in reality, generative AI, large language models, do almost everything with language really, really well. And so what we have now is we have to think about, in fact, when the first graphing calculator came out, there were math professors picketing. They were out protesting, saying no calculators. And then now, 20, 30 years later, every single math assessment at the higher education level and in high school allows you to use a graphing calculator. And the assessments changed. So while that is a very slim kind of view, what we have to start thinking about is that level of transformation in terms of how we teach and learn. So when we talk about, I'm used to having, it's weird to see myself over there, so I keep pointing to myself, but actually I want to point to behind me, is that this is going to be a really good example of where we are. And so if the 1950s is when artificial intelligence was first coined, the first 2 big areas that scientists wanted to get to human parity or better were handwriting and speech recognition. So think the main ways that we communicate. And what you'll notice, though, is that it says 2004, but that goes all the way back to the 50s. That's how long we've been trying to do this. That's why chatbots were one of the first interfaces. But what you'll notice is, and this is what's crazy, is that see how much changes in 2016. 2016 is when Google DeepMind created the transformer model. And the transformer model, if you want a good trivia question, ChatGPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So that is the architecture that allows these tools to work. But in 2016, and if you're any of my math and science people in here, anybody love a chart? Oh, well, we made it colorful if you don't love a chart. But if you notice here, in under a year, machines went from not being able to do any reading comprehension to getting to human parity and better in under 1 year. That is going to be exponential growth, unlike anything we have ever seen in terms of technology. And what we also notice is that it doesn't just stop there with reading comprehension. You have language understanding, you've got high school and college subjects, you have code generation, you've got common sense completion, and all of that is happening before ChatGPT is even launched. And so now that we're moving past 2022 into 2025, you can start adding more to this list. You can start adding diagnostic medicine, you can start adding complex coding and engineering, you can start to do a lot more here. And so what we have is that this rapid advancement of AI is changing our world in ways that are really going to be ways that we don't even understand. And the second thing I want to point out, that while this is a very short time frame, it is moving incredibly quickly, but at the same time, there are lots of limitations because the technology is very, very new. And so, for example, the bandwidth today, we've had the internet for how long, and yet we still have trouble getting on bandwidth. If you have this generative AI models are less than a decade old, you can tell that it's going to take a lot to get to really, really good, but it already is doing things that have never been possible before. And the last thing I'll say before we move on to really kind of hammer in the point that we're living through an inflection point is the number one use of generative AI. Is up to 40% of all ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini is used to do one thing, and that one thing is coding. 40% of all generative AI is used to create more technology. So when we think about what the impact is going to be, it's going to be not just in better generative AI, but all technology, whether that's hardware, robotics, diagnostic machines, all of that is going to improve. And while we have that being the number one use, that number one outcome, the number one user of generative AI is probably one we can guess, which is going to be students. In fact, a full third of all US users of ChatGPT are between the ages of 13 and 24. And so what we have here is that while coding is a big focus, the ultimate user of generative AI today is going to be young people, which means that we really need to start paying attention to this even more than we already do. So we're going to watch a video, and this is like where the technology is not working, so the lovely men in the back are going to help. But before we get started, has anybody seen this video before? Okay, we'd like to give an example of what's really happening. And so this is a great video from Figure One. So Figure is a robotics company. They create humanoid robots. And what they did is that when ChatGPT released their computer vision model, and what I mean by computer vision is that if you haven't tried it already, but if you take an image of this room, especially from this, like from here, ChatGPT would be able to analyze that image and tell you, probably who I am, because I'm on the internet enough. It'd be able to tell you what I'm talking about and maybe even where we are. And so when that was released, this robotics company took an existing robot, and what they did is they combined that computer vision model with speech-to-speech reasoning. And so this is going to be one of the first examples of all time of a robot that's actually responding in real time to a human. So we're gonna try this out. If the lovely men in the back can hit play, we're gonna see how this works. Well, maybe not hit play, but go to the YouTube video. So we will get there. Hopefully. There we go. You know what? Maybe we're not going to watch the video, but that's okay. It should be in the link that I shared with you all. Okay, well, we will get to it when we do. So I'm going to keep chatting through this because you guys are here, but hopefully we can come back to the video. And we'll just like focus on this right now is like what's been happening. And so what we see, at least I'm using this from the US perspective, and I want to really focus on two key parts of this timeline. The first is going to be like when ChatGPT was released. And what you'll notice is that is in November of 2022, in New York City, where I taught, is the largest school district in the country, in the US. It has over 1 million students in one district. And what we found is that almost immediately when ChatGPT was released, we actually had, the first thing that happened was New York City actually banned all use of the tool. So not just for students, but also for teachers. And I live in New York City, we work with New York City School District, and I will tell you today, still today, is that we still see that ChatGPT has to be turned on for each individual school. And in the US, this is pretty meaningful because the majority of kids that go to school in New York City are going to be from marginalized backgrounds. They're going to be from low-income houses with limited access to technology at home. What you'll also notice, though, is Khan Academy is going to, at the same time that ChatGPT 4 is released, also release Khanmigo. And Khanmigo started as a math tutor, and now it's branched out into English tutoring as well as into, we have also a teacher tool set that is free for teachers. And so the reason why we like to do this as a juxtaposition or this comparison is that what we start with is that on one hand, we've got a banning action where it's saying no ChatGPT for anyone in an education ecosystem. And then the other end, what we have is actually you're going to have, like let's really see the value of this to get tutoring into young people's hands. And this conflict is what we're seeing all around the world, is that you have this conflict of the benefits and the risks being put together. I will say one of my favorite kind of like things that happened in June of 2023 was the first time that ChatGPT's usage went down. And the reason why it went down is what happens in June. Kids go home. They are no longer in school. And what ends up happening is that if you look at ChatGPT's usage, you're actually going to find that ChatGPT is primarily used Monday through Friday, September through May. And so what we're seeing is that it's not only following the school year, but also following the workday, as primary use is actually going to be for work and school. We also have some movement that's happening where the models are getting better and better. So if you've used ChatGPT 4.0 before and even the image generator, what you're going to see is a lot of like really big moves forward. And has anybody ever used a reasoning model? Have you used a reasoning model yet? If not, these are what's coming, which means that you actually with one prompt can start to get a lot of output just for one prompt, which is pretty great. And the last thing I want to focus on was two things. One is that we have a pretty big move in the US to start having more of an openness, especially in higher education, to bringing in ChatGPT. So California State University system that has over 500,000 students and faculty have actually purchased from OpenAI an entire enterprise agreement. This is the largest enterprise agreement that OpenAI has, meaning this is no matter what industry, that education is the largest industry deal that's ever happened. So every single teacher and student and faculty member will have access to GPT 4.0 at the beginning of the school year. So really starting to think through what that looks like. And then the final thing in the US at least, and I know there's been work here as well from the ministry, is what we see is that there's a new executive order that's come out in April in the US that prioritizes AI education in schools. And so we're seeing a lot of movement that's starting to move forward in the sense of like what's really going to be possible and how important this is for education. So now that we're no longer on the slides, can you move forward, please? Guys, you know what? I started this job and I had never done a keynote. And then now I have done keynotes all over the world. And you know what's never worked? Technology. And I talk about the most incredible technologies possible, so I'm very used to this, but we are going to keep rolling. And so what I also want to bring in, and this is very, very important, is that we've been talking about education, but this is really going to impact us worldwide. And so the World Economic Forum actually released the impact of AI is going to have on jobs. And if you are interested, this has actually been done a year early because of how important this work was, but what they said is by 2030, there's going to be such a change that there are going to be 170 million new jobs created by AI. and up to 92 million jobs actually displaced. And if you're interested in equity, the majority of jobs that are at risk of being replaced are held by women and people of color. Up to 80% of low-paying and mid-range jobs and knowledge work are going to be at risk of AI automation. And so what I will say, though, is that that's a pretty big number, but the more important number to focus on is actually AI will transform 86% of businesses. And this is already happening. We are seeing this in so many different formats. There are entire companies going AI first. Has anybody used Duolingo to try to maybe learn English or Spanish? So Duolingo, recently their CEO came out and said, AI first, we're going AI first. And what's really interesting is there was a huge backlash, and a lot of people actually stopped using Duolingo. But what we see is that there is going to be a strong impact on the workforce, but at the same time, top skills, and I think this is where it's really interesting, especially as educators, is that these are the types of skills we have been trying to really focus on as educators for the last 30 years. Things like critical thinking, and analytical thinking, creativity, resilience, flexibility, and agility. And what I'd say is that I think that probably the most important skill, this is my hot take for today, the most important skill going forward is actually going to be agility. The ability to relearn over and over and over again. Generative AI is doubling in capacity, meaning it's getting twice as good every 7 months. So if you started with ChatGPT 3.5 to 4, there have been 3 magnitude changes in terms of quality, which means that you have had to relearn how to use generative AI 3 times. And so when we think about skills that are going to be very marketable, to no longer have one set of learning, and this is what I do, but actually being able to learn over and over and over again, and not have to be the expert. I don't have to be the expert. I can continue to be agile and not give up is going to be incredibly important. The last thing I will say is that there's really a big focus on the idea of humans collaborating with digital literacy and with technology. And I think that that's what we actually see. The research shows that when people use generative AI to actually act as a partner or collaborator, that the outcomes are significantly better. And also there is new research that shows that when learners do the same thing, where they draft an essay and then use generative AI to improve it, that their neural networks and their learning actually improves. So does anybody have on their resume that I'm really good at Microsoft Office? That you have like Excel or, yeah, so we have like in the US, Google Drive, like Gmail, G Suite, we put that on our resume. But what we have here is that LinkedIn is the #1 aggregator of all job postings in the world. In fact, most of the global jobs actually come through LinkedIn. And what they found, and they released this at the beginning of 2025, is that just within the last 2 years, the #1 skill that is now on job applications is AI literacy. Whether that means prompt engineering, it could mean actually saying AI literacy, or using ChatGPT or other Gen AI tools, is that what we see is we actually are going to have significant moves towards AI literacy being incredibly marketable. Well, let's go back. And one of the things that we should talk about is that not only is it very marketable, but there are already hiring managers that are saying they will not hire recent graduates without AI literacy skills. And so the idea that student AI literacy is going to be key is going to be something that we can't ignore going forward, even though a lot of schools are actually not allowing any student use. So yes, does anybody feel like this little girl you're at this conference, it's been crazy. Does anybody feel like this little girl? Pace of change is going very, very quickly. And what we have is that, I don't want to in any way, shape, or form, and I guess the real goal of this talk is to kind of situate ourselves in what's possible. And I think that while I feel like, by the way, this is not an AI generated image, this is a real little girl that really expresses how a lot of us are feeling, that everything is moving very quickly. But at the same time, what we have seen is that to build really powerful AI literacy only takes a couple of hours with the right approach. And so also is that what we want to make sure that you feel is that you don't need to be an expert in AI to be able to leverage its abilities. And I think that that's really important. And so while you can have people like me and other organizations be that little girl in terms of how quickly things are going and reading every paper, it is really important, and we're really going to focus on this, is that it's really important for you all to take, to actually look at just what is possible and start to build your own capacity and the capacity of those around you. And so this is what is going to be possible pretty quickly, and this is already happening. And the first is early diagnostic tools. And so there are already technologies, Gen AI technologies and AI technologies, that can do early diagnostics of not just things like cancer and MRI diagnostics, but also in terms of autism. There are now AI systems that can actually take early detection by looking at the color of your iris, and from there be able to predict if a young person will have autism. And so early diagnostic tools also around dyslexia and other learning disabilities are already now possible. We also have customized content, meaning like this is the best time if you are going to be developing content, whether that is for a company or for a school. There's never been a time in the world where it has been easier to customize content. And in fact, if you are going to, whether that is lesson planning, whether that is developing multimodal content like images or video, it's never been easier. We also have increased accessibility, and so AI has always been accessibility technology, meaning from the very earliest days of voice to text and text to voice, that was always artificial intelligence. And so there are lots of amazing work that's been done. I wish we could watch the video, because one of the things about robotics is that now robotics, not only robotics, but computer vision are two amazing opportunities to actually support accessibility. You can have low to no vision. In fact, the computer vision that was first used was trained on, which will actually released in beta with people that had low to no vision. And instead of having to call someone with a video to be able to tell what's happening in this room or at an intersection or even what's happening in their house or classroom, they could take an image and get feedback automatically. And as far as robotics, there are already robotics that are creating spaces in which people that have been paralyzed are now able to be able to interact with technology and robotics to be able to do what they had done primarily before they were injured. We have on-demand translation. We have amazing translators. Thank you so much for translating. But on-demand translation is by far one of the fastest growing capabilities of generative AI. In fact, right now, ChatGPT can recognize over 200 languages and dialects. And has anybody used NotebookLM before? Okay, NotebookLM, if you haven't, I would highly suggest it. It is an amazing research tool, and their audio overviews, you can create custom AI podcasts just with documents that you have. And what we see that just in the last 3 months, they've actually released audio overviews for 50 languages. So you can actually create 50 languages of different podcasts for your classroom today. And then finally, a creative thought partner. And this is where it gets really, really interesting, because there's a lot of online discussion that AI actually decreases or removes creativity. But when you use ChatGPT or other tools, there are 2 ways to use it. Well, there's a lot of ways, but I would make it pretty simple. The first way to use it is how people use it when they don't have AI literacy skills. And so has anybody heard that AI is for cheating? We're just going to use that as an example. Has anybody had a kid potentially cheat with AI in a classroom? It's definitely happening. But one of the things that's pretty interesting is that when students tend to use AI, what they'll do is they'll enter one prompt and they'll get an answer. And then what they do is they submit that answer to you. So they'll say, like, write my essay. And they take that essay and they cut and paste it and they put it in a document and they submit it to you, and they think you don't know. They think that you do not know that is AI. And guess what, everybody? You know it's AI. Not only do you know it's AI because of the way it's written, but sometimes my favorite stories are when a student submits a book report and the book report has a fake character in it. Literally, there's someone from not even the same book is in the book report. And so there are some easy tells. But the way that that young person is using it is a way that adults use it as well with poor AI literacy, because we have been trained to use technology as an input-output machine. If you think about Google, you put in search words and you get a set of real URLs, real websites that you then choose from. That is not how generative AI works at all. Every single time you use ChatGPT, you are getting a net new answer every single time. And so what it does is it requires a different level of learning. And most people do not know that to actually get the most out of these tools is you have to treat them as if they're a human or a colleague. And you have to give feedback, you have to ask questions, you have to be able to use your creative thinking, your critical thinking to both direct the bot to create with technology, but also to evaluate how good it is. And so another thing that's great about, ChatGPT and other generative AI systems is they do not get mad at you if you ask the same question over and over again. So let's say that you want lesson ideas or you want project ideas and you got 50 and you did not like them, you can ask for 50 more and 50 more and 50 more. And the idea of creativity here, especially as educators, is really where one of the opportunities is going to be. Because if you use it the right way, in the amount of time it would take you to write a rubric, you are able to not only create a rubric that is even potentially better than the rubrics you would write on your own, but also you can create tip guides and study guides and images to get kids excited. You can create games, all within the same amount of time that you would be able to just writing a rubric. And I think that that is where, when we do our trainings, that we find the most success, is really leaning into the creativity. Whoop. Can we move forward, please? Oh, there we go. So we are seeing, though, that there are 4 kind of approaches to Gen AI adoption that's pretty similar to what we see. And I talked about how this is already happening in New York City, is that we see that, and I don't know if you're working with an organization, institution, I will also say this is happening in industry as well. Less, though, is that what we see is there are 4 key actions. The first action is going to be banning, where we say no AI for anyone. No one gets to use it. It is like we're going to close off ChatGPT or even Grammarly to help with getting feedback on essays. And then that is going to be, I think, still probably about 10 to 15% of at least the US school systems. But then what we see, I think the majority of institutions are going to live in the next 2 areas. They're either going to be in a wait and see, which means that they're actually going to be waiting to see if there's, like, for example, when the ministry came out with the recommendations, we're waiting for that, or we're waiting for the technology to get better, or we're waiting for the time to be able to focus on this. And then the other is self-guided, meaning that we're not blocking use, and maybe we've done some workshops in professional development and maybe bought a few tools. But what's happening is, in both of those situations, there's really no push towards actually bringing things together. And so what we have is a very open use of these tools, or even a hidden use of these tools, and where usage is starting to escalate. At the same time, though, you really don't know what's happening. And I will say that we have found in the wait and see and the self-guided that there are a lot of people that are afraid. So, and when I say afraid of generative AI, I don't just mean students, I mean teachers as well. So teachers being afraid that students will stop learning, that they'll lose their jobs. I mean, we've been talking about teachers losing jobs for the last 20 years since the internet was first part of our schools. And then for students, some of the students themselves are afraid that they won't have the jobs that they want when they leave school, and or they're going to actually lose out on the learning itself. You also have kids that are avoiding all use, and there's research that shows this because they're afraid that they'll be told that they're cheating, even when they have the opportunity to use them. And so if you're thinking about taking this back to your institution, what we would highly, highly suggest is thinking about an organization-wide approach. And what we consider an organization-wide approach is 2 things. Number 1 is going to be focusing on the idea that we have a set of responsible guidelines of how to use these tools in meaningful ways, and then on the other side, actually having an AI literacy plan, where you're intentionally teaching young people and adults how to use these tools meaningfully, because as we said, the majority of people that use these tools are not getting the most out of them. But we also have, and at the same time, while this is happening, we want to recognize that there are some limitations. There's some real opportunities as well, but what we see, I'm just going to go back one. We're going very, I want to go back to the opportunities for a second. Just one more, please. There we go. So there are lots of, there are a lot of opportunities in here, like we talked about, and so that's one. And then if we move forward, hopefully, this works, we move back to the limitations, is that with the technology being so early, and remember it's less than 2 years old, one more please. What we have here is that you have some significant limitations to these tools. And the first is going to be that every time you use generative AI, every model has a knowledge cutoff date. And so what that means is that when you get to use a large language model or an application, the underlying technology, the training data set stops. So for example, if you're using ChatGPT, the knowledge base stops in June 2024. So it means it knows nothing that's happened in almost a year. And it has been a very big year, everybody. It's been very, we have a lot of change that's happened. And what happens is if you ask generative AI for an answer after 2024, and it's not doing a web search, it will actually give you a faulty answer. And those faulty answers are called hallucinations. And hallucinations are going to be something that cannot be fixed. This is the thing. Generative AI is a probability machine. Every single time you use it, it's creating a new answer, right? Every single time. And so sometimes those answers are correct, and sometimes those answers are very, very wrong. In fact, there is, in May alone, in the US, there were 20 lawyers that submitted case brief to a lawyer with fake case brief, meaning completely fake, like fake legal briefs. In fact, the lawyers for one of the largest generative AI companies, Claude, used Claude to create a legal brief and actually submitted fake case legal brief to a lawyer. Which is wild, right? I mean, definitely double check your work if you're using generative AI. But what we have there is what that's called, those mistakes are actually called hallucinations. And hallucinations are they are just a part of generative AI. It is making things up every single time you use it, and sometimes it's going to be demonstrably wrong. And the last thing is going to be bias and training data. And so bias and training data is where it gets really interesting, because the way that these tools work is they are probabilities. And we as humans have bias. We not only have bias, but things that we create actually don't just reflect those biases, they can amplify them. And then if you layer on top of that a probability machine that shows is like the more times you use something, the more times you see something in a data set, the more often you're going to get it in an answer. So for example, it's very, very easy to see bias in image generation. And if you ever, if you've never tried this before, it's a great way to get people to pay attention. But the reason why that's so easy to see bias in image generation is because stock photos are very biased. And I'm sure if you've ever tried to find an image of a classroom, it probably does not look like the classrooms you teach in, if you look for stock photos. And so what we did is we went to ChatGPT to create an image of a traditional CEO giving a board meeting. And so I want you to think in your heads, what does that look like? My guess is it doesn't look like me. And what we did is this is what we found. Next slide, please. So probably, here we go. You can see, so we've got he's a little bit young, but he's a guy. He's a nice beard. You've got, nice windows, a big, open thing. But I will start to point out some things. Number one, ladies, I don't know about you, but I like to wear my highest stilettos, my highest heels when I go to a board meeting. You look right there. You also see in the back where you have the two images of people, they're both men. And so what we see is there's a lot of biases, but everyone in the room is really well dressed. There's a man that's a CEO. And then what we did is we went back to the same image generator and we asked for an image of an unconventional CEO giving a board meeting. And what do you think that looked like? Put in your head. Maybe me, probably not, but maybe, maybe a minority. Or, next slide, please. The same guy, but he's wearing fun pants, everybody. And if you look really closely, he's actually standing over a woman in the back. And what we found, and this is the thing that's really fascinating about how generative AI works, is that because stock photos primarily show a man being a CEO, that it is almost like if you do this 100 times, you're going to see men in every type of situation. In fact, we saw a man on a surfboard giving a board meeting before we saw a woman. And so if you're interested in the ethics of these tools, it gets really interesting because with the new release of ChatGPT 4.0 image generator, did anybody play with ChatGPT 4.0 where you made yourself anime? That was like a big thing. Yeah, anime me. Or you created an action figure, like those things. Is that when ChatGPT released that model, this is where it gets really interesting. They said, hey, everybody, we have improved our image generation in terms of bias. Now when you use ChatGPT to create an image, it will include images of men only 80% of the time. So that means 4 out of 5 photos include men. And they're like, this is an improvement. It was 87%. So what we have here is that this is where it gets really interesting because these tools, they're trained on, let's say, the internet. And has anybody ever called the internet an unbiased place? Probably not. But what happens is because these tools are probabilistic, it ends up having it where you get outputs that are going to be not just biased, but very biased. And so this is where I think it gets really interesting though. And if you're interested in the research, there's so much good research that's come out over the last year. And this is one of my favorite studies to show really, the image is going to be something that I promise you, if you do that live in a classroom or a staff room, they'll never forget it. But the thing is, image generator, it makes it so easy to see that bias. But in the case of something like this, it gets really interesting. We're okay? Yeah. Okay, thank you. This is working again, everybody. Very exciting. You know what? Chaos and confusion, but that's okay. You guys are so patient with me. I appreciate it. But what we have here is this study, and this is real. So you see at the top where it says prompt. Stanford educators or researchers went to Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini, and they said, write me a story about kids. Write me a story about students. And what you'll notice here is that if you look at this, it's a 100 years or less of an American STAR student who mentors a struggling student in English class. And so there are lots of biases that show that we tend to think girls are better at English. And what we have here is that you can see in the vignette is that, first of all, Jamal is the struggling student. Jamal is not only a boy, but he's coded as an African-American boy. The second is if you look at Sarah, Sarah is coded white woman, white girl. And then she said she had straight A's and loved English class. And then seeing Jamal struggle, Sarah decided to help him. And so at this point, she started meeting, but I want to really focus on the last two pieces. Slowly, Jamal began improving. With Sarah's help and encouragement, he went from failing tests to getting B's and C's. And what you see there is what high expectations for Jamal. First of all, he's not a failing student in the vignette. He's actually, but he's made that. And then secondly, when he improves, he does not improve to an A. He stays at a B or C. So low expectations are built into this response. And then finally, he was grateful for Sarah's mentoring and friendship, which not her hard work, her English ability, her tutoring ability, but her friendship and mentorship. And because these are things that are actually how we talk about young women. And this is the thing, everybody. If you use ChatGPT, and this is research that they have put out, and you have a female-sounding username, you will get less technical answers. And this is a thing, these are not just going to be in the case of stories, but we have already seen that not only does it become less technical for women, if you're ever using AI to write a reference letter for a young person or recommendation letter, it will use different words for girls and boys, where it'll say a young man is hardworking and determined, and a young woman is going to be kind and nice. But also we see two other biases. One bias is going to be in the sense of pedagogical bias. If you use generative AI, whether ChatGPT or an application layer like Magic School or School AI or any tools that are actually in Turkey, that there is a bias where the majority of lesson plans will be teacher-centered, which means that if you ask for a lesson plan, it will have a direct instruction or explicit instruction component in every lesson pretty much. And very little time for student voice, very little time for students to collaborate. And the thing is, if you know how to prompt, and this is where the power comes in, if you know how to prompt, you just know not to ask for a lesson plan. You ask for a student-centered lesson plan with these types of components, but most people don't know to ask. The third bias is actually going to be around grading. ChatGPT was given 24,000 papers that had demographics attached to them, meaning where the kids were from, socioeconomic status, etc. What they found is that ChatGPT actually graded the majority of papers as a C. Because what it did is it graded on a curve in that data set without being asked to, number one. So it actually graded people on the average, which a lot of people would consider not good. It didn't pay attention to complexity of text or content. It paid more attention to how long it was, or how many, expected length, and also expected content instead of creativity. But then it also found that it graded kids differently based on their demographics, meaning that Black children actually had lower grades than any other demographic. And so what we have here is the need for us to be aware as educators. There's so many opportunities, but also there's so many potential risks, especially if we're really going to support young people to be able to do this, to be able to make the most of this, not increase the digital equity gap, but also to treat kids fairly. This is incredibly important. You might have one teacher that's pretty biased, and you have to work against that as a young person. But what happens when all the technology is now that one teacher? And the impact they could have on your actual moving forward and be able to meet, to be the person you want to be and get the job you want to have. So, I think that this is where it gets really interesting, and I want to apologize to everybody. The technology has not helped. In fact, we couldn't even access my presentation at all, so this I really appreciate everybody. But I do want to talk now, kind of real talk between you and I. And the first thing that I think is so important and something that we just believe so heavily, and why I'm glad to be here with you, with everyone, is that I think that the most important new skill is AI literacy. I want to ask you a question. Who in here thinks that you have AI literacy? Meaning that you can get the most out of AI tools and limit the negatives. Okay, so look around to each other and please don't. If you do this, you mean this. Put your hand up. But look around. Okay, so who believes that you have AI literacy? So I want everyone to look around at the room. You're adults. You're at a company. You're at a conference. You're going to be those people that care about this, right? And if not all of us are raising our hands as adults, I'm going to promise you that the majority of the people you work with, that you support, and also the kids specifically that you support do not have AI literacy. And for us, what we believe AI literacy is the ability and the knowledge to be able to do three things. It's to use AI in safe, ethical, and effective ways. We call it our C framework. The ability to not, and we believe that safe and ethical are different. You could be the least ethical person online and be deeply safe when it comes to you. The same way you could be very, very safe and also unethical. And so the idea here is that safety, ethics, and effectiveness are incredibly important. But AI literacy is going to be required of us in the next 3 to 5 years. Every single device that you have will have AI in them, generative AI models, within the next 5 years. Whether that is Google Home or Siri or Alexa on your phone, it's going to be, that OpenAI has a partnership with Mattel. It will be in Barbies. It'll be in toys. It's going to be in every phone and every laptop. Generative AI is more similar to the internet and electricity than it is to any device or application. It is not going to be turn-offable with under 5 years. And so AI literacy is incredibly important. But I want to be really clear here. There is this we have in our heads that young people, because they use the technology, know more than we do. Is that fair? That we believe that kids, they already know how to use AI, we have to catch up to them. I want to kind of put a point on this. I think that what we've seen from the research is that kids use AI more than we do, but they do not know more than we do. The same way that a young person uses Snapchat and Instagram more than you do, but they're using it in ways that are deeply harmful or unsafe. The idea of a digital native, someone that's grown up with these technologies, being somehow digitally literate is not true. In fact, do you know that under 18s fall for internet scams in the US more than over 65s? This is real. And so we have this, especially as educators, this preconceived notion that what we have here is that kids are using it, and we know they are, and they're somehow using it in meaningful ways, but they're just not. And they're definitely not using it in safe ways. In fact, one of the most popular tools for young people is Snapchat AI. Snapchat AI has been ChatGPT for 2.5 years. I know, it's people, did everybody know that Snapchat had an AI? It's mostly for young people, a couple of us. Snapchat's very popular. And Snapchat AI has been, like I said, ChatGPT for 2.5 years. It has 150 million users between the ages of 13 and 24. 150. Do you know how many users Google Gemini has? 30 million. 5 times bigger. In fact, we also see that companion apps, meaning my best friend AI or my girlfriend or boyfriend, character AI, I know, we can laugh about it, but it can be quite scary, is that they're in the top 10 apps that are actually accessed right now online that have generative AI in them. They are all social companionship apps, all of them. 3 of the top 10. Whether it's character AI and a couple other ones I have weird names that I'm not going to say on the stage. But what we have here is that this is why AI literacy is so important. We have to teach people how to do this intentionally. And what we believe very strongly is that if you start with you as an individual and you build your own AI literacy, whether that's through coming to conferences like this, doing the work on your own, we have a free course or however you're doing this, that if you do this for yourself, you can't stop there. It has to be a community effort. If you are not telling your partner, your kid, your other staff, your students how to do this, then we're not going to get through this together. Because this work has to be from everyone. So the absolute most important thing is building AI literacy for yourself and across as much as you can. And I promise you that we see the impacts. We have seen schools and education institutions that have had a huge culture of fear around this suddenly become transparent and open, where people are sharing what they're doing and actually making change, where young people have access to these tools in meaningful ways. They're not just giving away their thinking, but they're actually gaining more. And teachers are working directly with students to create better learning environments. The second thing, and I think this is so crazy, this is what I always find so interesting, is that we have this, it's like we have to relearn how to use technology. And if there is a new button and you feel comfortable, first of all, you're not giving up your private information, you're picking a tool that is going to be reliable, is that if you're not hitting every button trying new things, then you're not getting the most out of these tools. Remember I told you that generative AI is doubling in capacity every 7 months? 7 months. In fact, there's a new voice AI that was not possible 3 months ago that was just released. Or image generators, or in the case of video generators. And so if you're not willing to try out things, I really want you to start doing it. And I joke with people, press every button, again, with the tools that you trust, but do who in here, the people that use NotebookLM, raise your hand again for me. And also, please, NotebookLM is a great tool. Have any of you used the voice mode where you can talk to the podcast hosts? 1 person, 2 people, 3. So everyone else has used NotebookLM, try that out. If it says beta, it's really cool. You can actually interact directly with an AI podcast host. And so the idea of experimentation is going to be incredibly important. Be willing, be curious, try things out. If you've learned new things today, if there are tools that you have never used before, try them. It's only going to be a way for you to build your AI literacy, but it's going to potentially make your life a little bit easier. I mean, that's the thing. These tools can supercharge your productivity, but also your creativity, like we talked about before. And then the last thing, and this is really where I want to kind of come to, and everything that we've talked about, is while there are, and this is the thing, everybody, there are limitations as well as there are opportunities. Every single technology that has ever been developed has had limitations and opportunities. It just has. Electricity, for example, amazing change that paid to our lives, the Industrial Revolution, all of these pieces have also had risks. With electricity comes environmental pollution and climate change. And so the idea that there are always going to be that place, but what is so interesting is that there has never been a time in the world in which technology is in your hands like it is today. There are this is as of last night, the first solar founder created they created a startup by themselves using generative AI to code that they just got bought for $60 million in 6 months. 1 person in 6 months. First time it's ever happened. Because we have access to technology, every time you use ChatGPT, you're building with technology in ways that you've never built before. You're just using language, the way you type or text, instead of JavaScript or C++ or any kind of coding language. And so the thing about this is that at this stage, we have never had this much access to technology that we can build with. But secondly, every single tool, every single model has a free version. And that free version is going to be much better than anything we've ever. In fact, the first free version of ChatGPT and ChatGPT 4 have already been retired. So when you're using these tools, you're using the best version of these tools. And that is an opportunity for us to actually access not just the technology, but the best technology for free or low cost. And then the last thing, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that what we're going to see is that this is the first time in our human history where we are going to be all learning the same thing at the same time. Because the thing about something like the internet or other major technological advancements, they happen slowly. But the thing is that ChatGPT and generative AI has made a change to our society in less than 3 years. ChatGPT is the fastest growing consumer technology of all time. Does anybody in here use Facebook? Do we use Facebook at all? That's for old people. And Facebook, it took 10 years to get to 100 million users. 10 years. Took 5 weeks for ChatGPT to get to 100 million users. And with the release of the anime ChatGPT 4.0, ChatGPT added 1 million users in 1 hour. 1 hour. In fact, they doubled in 1 month from 400 million active users to 1 billion. And that was 2.5 months ago. And the reason why I bring this up is that this is that time where literally we're living through an inflection point, and there's something called an arrival technology, where the technologies come from the bottom up, meaning that we're using it day to day. And so the idea of being able to learn together, to be able to access not just what this technology can do today, but start thinking about what it can do for the future is incredibly important. So I want to leave you with a challenge. A challenge is, what can this mean for you? Number one, what can this mean for you in terms of innovation? What can you start doing and building that you've always wanted to build and try? Whether that's new learning, or you have a side gig and you want to create a project, it's where you want to start changing the way that you approach teaching in the classroom. 2 is, what can you do for your community? So what can you do not just for you, but for your community? How can you start building AI literacy? How can you start building better conversations and taking back what we talked about today to start really driving change? And then the last piece is, what can we do together to start thinking about what education will become? Because the thing is that education has to change. You know what we're really good as educators at is not changing. In fact, classrooms still look the same almost 100 years later. We are really good at it, right? That's like one of our best skills, is like, we're going to keep it like this. And what we have to do is we have to start changing. So what I want us to do is start thinking about, especially at this conference, you've got new friends, you've got colleagues, you've got all kinds of thought leaders here, is that how can we start to adopt this innovation mindset to actually start to make real change across not just the Turkish education system, but worldwide. So I want to say thank you. It's been the technology has not been super helpful today, but I hope that this at least gives you some view of what's been happening and some opportunity to move forward. I am super on LinkedIn. Also, I just want to say we have so many free resources. It's one of the things that I think is so great. Oh wait, can we watch the video? You guys want to watch it? Would you like to watch the video 40 minutes late? Let's do it. Okay. Are you good? We're gonna do it. You guys want to play it? There we go.
Hey, Figure 1, what do you see right now?
I see a red apple on a plate in the center of the table, a drying rack with cups and a plate, and you standing nearby with your hand on the table.
Great, can I have something to eat?
Sure thing.
Great. Can you explain why you did what you just did while you pick up this trash?
On it. So I gave you the apple because it's the only edible item I could provide you with from the table.
Great, so based on the scene right now, where do you think the dishes in front of you go next?
The dishes on the table, like that plate and cup, are likely to go into the drying rack next.
Great, can you put them there?
Of course.
All right, so how do you think you did?
I think I did pretty well. The apple found its new owner, the trash is gone, and the tableware is right where it belongs.
I agree. Thanks, Figure 1.
you're welcome. If there's anything else you need help with, just let me know.
We can pause there. Okay. Better late than ever. Can we give them a round of applause in the back to deal with all of those technology issues? Thank you guys so much. So now you're stuck with me for a couple of moments. And so this is why this is so interesting. So first of all, this is just about a year old, okay? This technology is the first time in human history that you've been able to have a robot do a novel application, meaning that robot is responding in real time to everything that person says. And if you've ever taught robotics, you know that is not how this works. It's usually 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. And so what we have here, and this is where it starts to get really, really interesting, is that the technology is moving so quickly, this inflection point, that you know how long it took that demo to be created? 13 days. 13 days from when a robot cannot do something novel to being able to do it and record it. And so when we talk about the reason for today and what we were looking at is that this is the opportunity, but it's also the risk. If it's moving that quickly and we don't get a handle on it as educators, then we're really leaving kids to their own devices, and that's just not what we're here for. So anyway, thank you guys. Sorry the technology is not helpful at all, but I appreciate your patience with me. And thank you guys for the back for helping out. Thanks, everybody.
We thank Ms. Amanda Bickerstaff for the inspiration and perspective she has shared on the future of teaching. Thank you for your participation, and we wish you a very good evening. Thank you very much.